Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to Under the Hood. My name is Tony, where we're live every Thursday at 3 o'clock to answer your car questions. So if you have noises, vibrations, rattles, leaks, and you want advice, feel free to comment now. At the end of the live here, I'll answer all of your questions. If you're wondering how a system works in the car, cooling system, electric motors, feel free to comment. Be more than happy to answer your questions. But today our topic is going to be what do you do when your car's overheating? So say you're driving down the road, all of a sudden your temperature gauge starts climbing to high, start seeing steam under the hood. What should you do? The last thing you want to do is keep on driving the car. That can damage the motor, blow radiators, cause a lot of other problems. So number one, steam under the hood, getting hot. Let's turn our heater all the way up and the fan all the way to high and pull off to a safe location. What that's going to do is the heater core is going to work like a radiator. It's going to help dissipate some of that heat. Also, while you want the car off, you want to turn the key on. That way the cooling fans are running, and that's going to help start cool down the vehicle. Keep in mind, if you are pulled over and the car's not running and all these fans are running, it is going to lower the battery voltage. So if your battery is weak, this could lower the voltage and may not make it start later on. So what I would recommend is key on, engine off, heater on, let it run for maybe a minute. Let's shut it off. The last thing you want to do right now is to open the hood, since it is overheating. So do that a couple times till your temperature starts getting down all the way to the cold. At this point, it is now safe to pop open the hood. So open the hood, and what we're going to do is we want to check the coolant level. The reason why I don't want you to open the hood until it cools off is I've seen it before where a car can get so hot and a radiator can actually explode. We actually seen a Jeep a few years ago overheat in the shop, and of course we're working on cars. We have the hood open and the radiator just completely exploded and shot all the way up to the ceiling. So you don't want to be hovering over that radiator and that steaming water get on you and burn you. So cars cool down to cool. We have the hood open. We want to check the coolant level. If it has overheated, is it overheated because it's low on coolant, or we may have another component? We can probably fill the cooling system and get to a repair shop. So you want to put your hand on the radiator cap. Check to see if it's hot. If you cannot put your hand on there because it's boiling hot, stop. Keep on letting it cool down until you can. Then at that point, you're able to open it. Most likely, you'll find that the coolant is low. Because it was low in the beginning and it caused it to overheat, or a component caused it to overheat and it spewed out all the coolant. Either way, you're going to need to top it off. So it's a good idea to keep coolant in your vehicle, not water. In a pinch, you could probably use water just to get to a repair shop or off the highway. If you keep water, it can freeze. So if it's in your car, it's going to get to single digits this weekend. That can freeze, bust. When it thaws, now you got a big wet spot in your car. So I typically don't buy 50-50 mix of coolant pre-mixed. I would just to have in your car, just as a backup. If it is in a pinch and you have to use water, that's fine. Just make sure when you get to a repair, let them know so they can completely drain all that water out of the system and add the proper mix of coolant. If you leave the water in the engine block, if it freezes, it actually crack and actually damage the engine block. Then not only do you need a new engine, there's a core involved because that block is just no good anymore. So you've pulled over, we got the cap off, we've noticed it's low, we have our coolant, now we want to fill it. And since we have the radiator cap off, we don't want to hover over the car filling it, because as soon as this coolant hits that hot block or the radiator, it's going to start steaming and spitting. So if you're hovering over that steam can actually burn you. So start filling it up till you get to the cool level, to the full level. At that point, put the cap back on it and go directly to an automotive repair shop. If you don't have these items and you're not comfortable filling it, get a tow. The last thing you want to do is go in here to a system that's overheating, that has high pressure and steam, and it can burn you. So if you're not comfortable, don't touch it. Call the wrecker driver. If you're AAA, call them, get them to tow your truck to a repair shop. So the question is, so that's what I would do if my car were to overheat. Of course, if you're home or close by and you made it home, let it cool off. The next morning, fill it up and get where you're going. It's typically, if your car is overheated, it's because there's a problem. Either with a component, which I'll kind of discuss here in a little bit, or because it was low on coolant. The cooling system should never be low. There's situations within seasons where you may need a top off, but if it's low, it probably has a leak, so that needs to be addressed. A cooling system, basically it's a pressurized system, so there should be no leaks. It is sealed, kind of like a pressure cooker or a Instapot. We're able to create pressure to lower the boiling point, which cooks food faster. Well, same thing with cooling systems. We're able to pressurize the cooling system, get the temperatures up higher without boiling the system. So if we have a leak, it's going to increase the boiling point, which can cause steam and overheating. So a little leak can cause our fluid to go away, and also evaporation within the system. So the first thing I would check if it was my car or a customer coming in, and it's very simple, very inexpensive, is the radiator cap. And what the cap does, and it has a spring, and this spring is set to a certain pressure. This one is at 16 psi, which is fairly common. So as the system builds up pressure, the fluid expands, and when it expands, it has to have somewhere to go, and that goes in the coolant overflow. So actually the radiator cap will pop open, and that coolant will flow to the overflow. After the car cools off, this will come down and actually will allow coolant to go back in. So when we see cars that have a coolant overflow that's overfilled but the radiator low, probably looking at a radiator cap. Also, if you see a cooling system where the radiator hoses are sucked into a vacuum, also looking at the radiator cap. Very inexpensive repair. What you want to look at when you're inspecting them, of course, always make sure it's cold, is there's a couple gaskets here. You want to make sure they're not torn and they're making a good sealing on the radiator. And this is for a system that has a cap on the radiator and a coolant overflow. Another system that you may have on the car is a coolant tank. Now with these tanks, they don't have a coolant overflow. They have a cold full, so as it expands, it just expands in the tank, so there's room for expansion. The good thing about these caps are you can actually turn them just a little bit if the car is running hot, and you can just walk away and let this steam kind of go out. Then you can release the cap the rest of the way. Where these caps are, it's all or nothing. So once you press down and release the lock and raise it up, coolant can explode. So if you have one of these systems, do not open it up unless the car is totally cooled off, unless you're experienced with it, because it will hurt you. This system's a little bit more forgiving. You can just loosen it up a little bit, but be careful. If too much, it can pop off and do the same thing. And you also see there's warning labels on the cap too. So make sure, if you're not familiar with these systems, just don't touch them. Let someone professional look at it. So the cooling system, we have our cap, then we have coolant in our block, and then we have a thermostat. So this is a high failure rate for overheating. So other than cooling system being low, this is a culprit for a lot of cooling system problems. So coolant is inside the engine block, and engine's cold. We start up the car, and now we're raising up the heat. It actually has a spring in here, and the spring prevents the coolant from flowing. So if you heat a spring shrinks. So the idea is once our coolant gets to the right temp, as dedicated by the spring, it'll actually pull down and shrink and allow coolant to flow out to the radiator. As that flows out, new coolant comes into the block, cools the spring, then all of a sudden it closes and the cycle repeats. Overheating with these, typically what you'll see is them stuck closed. And the indication of that is I start up my car, it comes up to temp, then it keeps on going past temp and overheats because that coolant has nowhere to go. It sits there in the block and boils, and then you get hot, coolant gauge gets up, engine can stall. Hopefully you catch it before then and shut it off. Another problem we see with these is the opposite, is stuck open, so it allows coolant to flow all the time. And the indication of that is you start up your car in the morning and it takes a long time to heat up, or may never ever heat up. And once it heats up, maybe as you're driving down the road, the temperature gauge goes way down. And the reason for that is coolant's flowing all the time and it can't build up the pressure. So as you drive down the road, it keeps on recirculating that cool coolant. The reason for this thermostat not only is to cool the engine, is we want heat in the engine. It's actually a good thing. Number one is for your heat, for your AC, for your defrost vents. Another thing is for emissions. So we want the car to get in fuel control faster so we can control the tailpipe gases. So it is very important, and we do, you would think heating up a car fast is not good, but no, for emissions and tailpipe gases, it's what we really want in a system. So once the thermostat opens, how does the coolant flow? What flows the coolant throughout the system? And that would be the water pump. Either belt driven, like this one has a pulley that goes on, runs from the belts, from the power steering and the alternator, or water pump that is driven by the timing belt, which you can't see. This one, is belt driven, and they're both the same as you look in the inside, and that has a propeller. And what that does as you spin, as the belt turns, either time belt or the drive belt, that's actually going to circulate the coolant through the system. So when the thermostat is closed, it's just going to sit there and circulate it to the thermostat. And actually, at the same time, the heater core, and I'll get to the heater core later, then as it opens up, now it's going to start pumping it throughout the system, through the radiator hoses to the radiator. Now this is actually for a Honda. Most radiators are not this size. This is probably half the size of a standard radiator, but it makes it good for the camera. So thermostat opens, water pump is flowing hot coolant into the top. It goes down through all the channels, air passes through as you drive down the road, and the cooler coolant comes out into the block. Cycle repeats. So one thing you'll see on this one too is we have some pipes down here. This is actually this is an automatic radiator, automatic transmission. Your transmission cooler lines will also go into here and will cool the transmission fluid as you drive down the road. Problem is when you're not driving down the road and you're sitting at a light, what cools the fluid? And that would be the cooling fan. Also helps with the air conditioning. You may have one, you may have two, you may have three. So as you're at a light, this fan will kick on. We have temperature sensors, and it'll actually blow air throughout this cooling fan to help drop the temperatures. So if you have an overheating problem, you may have a description as a customer, they come in and say, my car's overheating only at idle. The first thing we always look at is the cooling fan running. If the radiator's clogged, sometimes you'll have a bunch of grass and leaves pile up in front of them. If that's clogged, normally you can spray it out. Every time I go through a car wash or I wash my truck or my wife's, I always spray out that front of that grill to get all that debris out. Because as you drive down the road, sometimes you can overheat because you're not getting the airflow through the coils of the radiator. Then finally, we have a heater core. And what the heater core is, I mean, they look identical to a radiator, and the same principle. Hot coolant comes in through the coils, then out. So this weekend, we're going to have single digit temperatures. So we're probably going to see a lot of issues with these heater cores when we're asking them to demand a whole lot of heat. So we have, like I said, hot coolant comes in through the coils. So now we have a kind of like the cooling fan, but we have a blower motor, and actually blows the air through the heater core. So on the opposite side we have hot air, which does our defrost in face and floor. What we see with these failures is not typically overheating unless they're leaking inside, is no heat. We'll come outside, one line is hot and the other one is cold. And the reason for that is flow. So this sits way back in the dash. This is one of the first components put into the car, into the heater box. Over time, there can be some sediment built up into the bottom of these coils and not allow it to flow. So we can actually power flush this and put high pressure and pulsate and get that out so we can actually get good flow back through it. And that prevents the replacement of a heater core, which is a big job. One of the first things put in a car, like I said, so you have to remove the whole entire interior to replace that component. So what can you do? What's good advice to prevent some of these components from failing? course, number one would be maintenance, having your fluid change when it's supposed to. If it's a standard glycol, when's the last time you replaced it? Has it been 60,000 miles? If it's a higher mileage, should be done around 100,000 miles. It is acidic, so it's going to break down over time, and the pH goes down. They can start eating into metal. It can eat into a radiator and rot a radiator out. It will. When we see this a lot with Fords, it'll actually the coolant gets so corrosive, it'll actually eat this metal out. And then all of a sudden, this water pump it's turning, but it's not flowing any coolant, so you have an overheating issue because it can't flow that coolant to the radiator, can't throw it past the thermostat. Sometimes you'll see a water pump with a plastic impeller, and with the heat and over time it breaks down and it'll actually slip. So your belt's turning, but the impellers are just sitting there spinning inside of the engine. So drain and fill. If your cooling system's low, it's low for a reason. So have that pressure tested, have that looked at to prevent it from overheating. Don't just keep on topping it off. Of course, every oil change that should be checked. If it's just a little low, a top off, that's normal. I wouldn't be concerned with it. But if you keep on having to add, throughout a week or throughout a month, there's an issue there. We're going to increase our boiling point, which is going to affect the whole cooling system. So definitely want to get that looked at. So, and I'll kind of review here. So if you have any questions about anything we've talked about, comment them now. If you have some car problems you're currently having, let me know. I'll answer them here in just a second. I'll probably show you some stuff here on this Subaru. You can just put that right there, it's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we'll get here in a second. And comment them now. I'll talk to you here in just a few about those. And I'll show you some stuff here on the Subaru. So every car, like I said, we have different type cooling systems. So let's just say this car has overheated. We've let it cool down. Now what we need to do is check the coolant level. So first thing we're going to do is touch the radiator cap. Let's see how hot it is. Is it hot to the touch, or can you hold your hand on it? I'd say if you can put your hand on it for 5 to 10 seconds, you're good. You can probably open. Another thing you can do is with the radiator hose, because it is a pressure system, squeeze it. Is there any pressure in the system? But if it's hard, there's pressure in it. So as soon as you release that pressure is going to try to go up. So this one I can squeeze, so it's probably safe to release the cap. So this style cap has the spring in it. So what you're going to do is press down and turn it and slowly release it. Then all of a sudden your cap comes off. This cap here looks good. Seals look fine. Cooling system is, sometimes you have to squeeze the hose a little bit. It's full. So if it were low, we top this off. Definitely put the cap on all the way, spin it till it's tight, and close the hood. And like I said, go to a repair shop immediately. Because the last thing you want to do is overheat this car. And normally, if you continue to drive a car that's overheating, what it's going to do is lock up and seize up. If you're lucky, after it cools off, you're fine. What we typically see, if someone drives it till it actually shuts the engine down and stalls, it'll probably blow the head gasket. Or in other words, there's a gasket between the engine block and the cylinder head. When that gets compromised, the two metals may warp. Now all of a sudden we have combustion gas in our cooling system, and we're rebuilding the top part of the motor. There's been situations where we've had someone run it hot. There's been failure in the cylinder head gasket area. We remove that cylinder heads. When we get there, the block is warped. So now you need a whole new engine, when all you really need to do is pay attention to that gauge. If it starts climbing, find a safe place. Pull over. If you're not comfortable, or if you don't have coolant, don't touch it. Call a wrecker driver. Don't try to risk it, because in the long run, it can cause a whole lot of damage, cost you a lot of money. So we'll see what kind of questions here. How can I tell if it's leaking? So to diagnose a coolant leak is all visual, and you may not be able to determine that because it is water based. It'll steam away. What we use, let me see, got it over here, is a coolant pressure tester. Let me turn the camera around here for you. And basically, here's all the adapters. So And this is just a few adapters. There's so many different radiator cap styles. There's sizes, there's lengths that are different. We have screw-on caps with threads on the inside, threads on the outside. So that's why we have all these different adapters to pressure test it. So what we do is we find the right adapter, and you can see we have a gauge on here. So we'll look at our cap, see what pressure, like that one cap I showed you was 16 PSI, and we'll actually pump this system up and add pressure till it gets to 16 PSI, then we'll watch it, see if it drops off. If it starts dropping off, we know we have a leak. And at that point, we start looking at the car to see where the leak is coming from. Is it coming from a hose? Is it a busted radiator? Hoses break down over time. They can leak around the clamps. Also, if they get crunchy and can fail. So that's what we do here to diagnose cooling system leaks. So thanks, Dan, for the question. And if you're not watching this live and you still have a question, comment now. We'll talk about it live next week. If you have a friend or family member that is having one of these problems and are putting it off, tag them here. Maybe give them some advice. Or if they are having problems, or if you know someone with the problems, tag them also in a comment, and I'll see if I can't help them out. So thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next Thursday at 3 o'clock. Drive safe. Bye.